Losing a loved one is difficult enough, but imagine finding out their death should never have happened. That's what 5 families are grappling with after a fatal helicopter crash. It was preventable, and it could happen again.
It's just unbelievable. You're just thinking, what the hell's happened?
Their helicopter crushed after falling from the sky.
This is 5 families whose family members have died as a result of this pilot not being trained to fly by instrument.
Paul, Ian, Linda, Nick and Dean. 5 people who never made it home from a work trip on a helicopter in Victoria. But they should have. On March 31, 2022, the group was on board one of 2 microflight helicopters, travelling to inspect property on the New South Wales-Victoria border. Around 7:40 a.m, both helicopters, each with a pilot and 4 passengers, took off from Melbourne. But within minutes, the choppers were confronted with a wall of cloud. The first one quickly turned around. This is what pilot Dean Neal in the second helicopter could see. It was a complete whiteout. Both pilots weren't trained to fly in those conditions, and sadly the consequences for Dean and his passengers were deadly.
They've rapidly descended and collided with terrain, and tragically all 5 people on board lost their life.
Australian Transport Safety Bureau Chief Commissioner Angus Mitchell.
This particular incident was a tragic, preventable incident that unfortunately we see far too often.
It was the second day in a row the group used helicopters to look at property. On social media the day before her death, Linda said, "The transport to work today, a little different."
She'd posted a photo saying, you know, I'm in a helicopter, this is how we're getting around work today. Like, just normal stuff for her.
Linda's brothers Doug and Andrew will never forget the day they were told their only sister was gone.
Just didn't gel. And then it was like, oh, it's Linda's chopper that's missing. And that's like, jeepers. And then later on that day, the police contacted me and said it's unlikely that anybody is coming out of this crash alive.
How do you feel when you think about your sister's final moments?
It was a 29-second flight from point of turn to point of impact. To know that my sister had the last 29 seconds of her life were horrific and terrifying. Can't get out of my head.
Tim's brother Nick left behind a wife and 3 children.
I'm devastated for his kids and for Dawn and for us and for him, because he worked so hard at being, you know, the best dad he could be, best husband he could be, best friend he could be.
Tim, Doug and Andrew say the loss of their siblings was hard enough, let alone learning their deaths were preventable.
But all of those things...
In January, the ATSB released its report into the crash, which revealed the helicopter and pilot weren't equipped to fly in cloudy conditions and shouldn't have taken the risk.
There needs to be trigger points for decision making, to either not go at all or to make early decisions as things start to look bad. Don't push through hoping things will be all right.
Pilots can be trained to use instruments to fly when it's not a clear day, but that training and equipment isn't currently mandatory for private or commercial single-engine helicopters.
If the pilot and chopper were equipped for instrument flight, is it possible those 5 people would still be alive today?
Yes, we would not have seen this particular incident. Over the last 10 years, we're seeing at least one of these types of incidents every year in Australia.
The ATSB's issued a safety recommendation to CASA to reduce the risk for paying passengers.
That risk is still very much alive today. It needs to be lowered. There are mechanisms to lower it, and that's what we expect to happen out of this incident.
Microflight told the ATSB it doesn't plan on mandating instrument training for visual flight rules pilots in single-engine helicopters because it's impractical and uncommercial. The training isn't a requirement in Australia and CASA won't make it one, describing the safety recommendation as involving expensive fixes, which the industry has already rejected.
In Victoria, 4 seasons in one day, cloud will happen. And if their only plan is we're going to try to avoid that happening, well, that was your plan before. And how did that work out? Not well, for us or for the other families.
In a statement, Microflight said, "We have implemented safety initiatives which exceed regulatory requirements, including the introduction of additional training aids, training procedures and aircraft upgrades." Microflight has at all times complied with Australian aviation legislation. The families believe there should be a higher safety standard for commercial operators. In a statement, CASA said it's presently reviewing the safety recommendation and will provide its response in due course.
This is a serious public safety issue, and our regulator is letting everybody down, and they are happily putting people at risk because of cost and convenience.
Well, there you go. The problem is too expensive to fix. How do you put a price on a life?